Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Gary Wright, Director of ISITC Europe, and this is another one of our um, podcasts that we're doing on the City Talk. And as recent listeners will know, that we bring in guests, characters from the city that have had successful careers in different walks of life, and we go through their career and get to know them. And I'm really excited, and I know lots of people out there are also excited, that George Littlejohn has agreed to be our guest and to talk to us about George Littlejohn. And we're all going to learn a lot, I think. So welcome, George. It's so great to have you as our guest.
Gary, thank you. I feel deeply honoured, deeply worried, deeply flattered, and this red face is not drink. It's probably blushing at the thought of what you just said about me. It's very kind indeed of you, and I've been a huge admirer of yours, as you know, for decades now, decades more than we can count. But great to be here. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, George. Well, should we start off? We all know and love and recognise your Scottish accent, but where were you born?
Well, I was born on the 8th, this is a reminder, commercial here for my birthday coming up in 2 weeks' time, 8th of May 1952, in the William Smellie Memorial Hospital in Lanark, which is in Scotland, as you know. It's actually politely pronounced Smiley. William Smiley was a Scottish doctor and gynecologist I think in the 18th century. The only problem was he was neither a doctor nor a gynecologist. He was just doing research on women in London, and they finally caught up with him. But before they could find out the story behind him, they named a maternity hospital for him after him in Lanark. It no longer exists. And I was born there very happily.
Well, a typically auspicious start there, George.
Oh, yes.
What about your mum and dad? What did your mum and dad do?
Well, my mum had me, obviously. My dad came to collect me on his fantastic Vincent Black Shadow and was roundly told off by my mum, saying that he was not expected to collect her and a new baby on the back of a motorbike. So he went back and borrowed my uncle David's Ford Prefect to come and do it. Mum was, I guess you'd call her a homemaker these days. I'm an only child, so there's a bit of trouble from day one and so on. My dad was an engineer who'd been in the Royal Navy during the war. And in fact, I quite often see from our office here that Belfast, on which he sailed, he never spoke about the war except in jolly things, fun things happening, the odd little accident, but he never mentioned, I found this out after he was gone, that he'd been on the Belfast, which by even those days' standards was a small battleship. He'd been on the Belfast in the Battle of the North Cape on the 26th of December, Boxing Day, 1941, when they managed to sink the Scharnhorst, a far bigger ship. And they were very lucky indeed to survive. So I'm lucky to be here. So Dad was an engineer, spent a bit of time in Italy working, and I grew up very happily. And I still have great memories of my first bike and all that kind of thing.
Lovely. I'm not surprised at all that you were a son, an offspring of a war hero. That fits very nicely into your character, I think, George. And where did you go to school?
I went to school, first of all, at the James Keir Hardie Memorial Primary School in Newart Hill, which is a village on the hills above the Clyde. Keir Hardie, who was the first leader of the Labour Party, was born nearby, and the school was named after him. And indeed, one of my cousins became head teacher of the school long after I'd gone. And then I went to the local high school, Dalziel, but pronounced DL High School, to which my father and his sister and brother had gone years beforehand.
Okay. And what was the young George like? What were the influences in your time at school?
Probably a bit of a pain, actually. I liked a few things. I wasn't super keen on everything, but I liked a few things. And I've got some great memories of things like, for instance, I used to think I'd imagined seeing Real Madrid playing Motherwell in 1958 in an evening match. And I'd been smuggled in under my dad's coat. I'd been sort of shoved down to the front, and I was in front of the fence to watch it as kids happened in those days, but I really believed I'd imagined this. But then I discovered years later that Motherwell had actually persuaded Real Madrid to come there one November evening to celebrate their new floodlights. And it was a tradition, not a tradition, but it was a common thing for football clubs to do in Britain at the time when they got floodlights, enabled them to play in the evenings, to get some big European team to come and play against them. So that was a big memory. I think probably a year later, I won a competition that the Royal Bank of Scotland, the Church of Scotland had run for an Easter essay, and I was very proud of that. I later developed a great love of cross-country running when I was even slightly fit. And I was a cheat because essentially I was always taller than most people and my legs are still longer than they should be. I mean, they fit okay, but they're just longer than as a percentage of my body, which meant I was able to run across things that people had to run up and down, by which I mean that instead of running down a dip and then up the other side, I could just jump from one side to the other. So I won lots of races, but then I got into, drink and so on. So that was the end of my sporting career.
Oh, right. And while you were at school, did you have an idea of what sort of a career you would like to progress?
Well, I used to do writing, and I'd always thought I might like to be some kind of writer. I remember getting out of the local library a book called How to Be a Writer, and I had it on more or less permanent loan. And I thought all you needed to be a writer was a typewriter. So that was my sort of main mission, to get a typewriter. But I realized then a bit afterwards that you need a wee bit more than a typewriter to be a writer. But I did actually, when I was at primary school, spend a couple of years writing a daily story for the class, which was great fun. So when I ended up at university, I did student journalism and then later on became a sort of vaguely proper journalist. So that writing's always been lurking in the background, but you can't be a writer full time.
Yeah. And the writing, would that be creative writing or would that be more around topics that's topics for the day?
Well, the stories I did at school, I mean, I can't remember the storylines, but they were essentially, running serials, almost certainly really badly written. I imagine them as being a bit like The Archers without the violence. But stories of life in Scotland. And then later on, it became sort of reporting type writing and analysis, which I still really enjoy. I still really enjoy the act of writing, as it were. That sounds a bit pompous, but I just enjoy doing it.
Well, I think anyone that's read some of the things that you publish, I think that we always enjoy your style of writing.
Well, that's
It's
kind.
always
I'm not
very
sure
good.
it's that good, but it's I enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
Keeps me off the
Well,
street.
that comes over in droves, George. And you mentioned university. What was the university you went to?
I went to Edinburgh. It was traditional where I lived, and it still is traditional for youngsters to go to university in the nearest big city, which is Glasgow. So people typically went to either Glasgow or Strathclyde University, but stayed at home. And much as I love my parents, I wanted to escape. And I thought then that if I escaped to sit, let's say, somewhere in England, my mum in particular might be a bit hurt, but Edinburgh seemed far enough away. I went there and studied economics, and I didn't actually know what it was, but that was part of the attraction.
Yeah.
Um,
And just for a year check, what sort of year we're talking about when you were at university?
well, last century, I mean, not the century before, that was 1969 to 1973.
Mm.
And it was a great time at Edinburgh University because it was a time of great revolution. And I was involved with, student political things. One of the great high spots, which fortunately didn't directly affect me, was a demonstration one night, or over a few nights actually, in the university's headquarters, the old college, which actually Gordon Brown very astutely refused to come to because he said it would end in trouble. And sure enough, it did. It was a protest about apartheid, actually. One of our colleagues, a nice guy whom I liked a lot, Stuart, his dad worked in the railways and brought along Stuart nicked a stick of dynamite and blew up the safe of the secretary of the university, the sort of main administrator, and found and nearly blew himself up in the room up and so on. But he found in it some documents which were really embarrassing for the university, and 4 people were, sent away for a while because of it. because you're not really meant to take jelly into universities. But it was kind of it was a fun time. It was.
Well, students will be students, and around that time, it was for people that we give them a bit of a history lesson. But we had the Vietnam War going on. We had Nixon in the White House. We had, obviously, in the UK, there was political unrest, Labour Party, Conservatives, I think 3 day week, and the oil crisis, and so it was a time of change. So being a young person at that time would have been, I would say, highly politicized in that. Were you politicized in that period, do you think?
I was pretty, but also it was all great fun. You know, I should say one general thing is that for most of my life, the world has been, I'm not sure it is anymore, but the world has been a very hopeful place. So being born in 1952, 7 years after the end of Hitler's war, everything was looking good. You know, everything was positive, looking ahead and so on. And there were, you know, people started getting their own cars. There were televisions, there were radiograms, very important. The bikes, I got a bike, and so, you know, that sort of thing. Materially, things were good. War looked like a thing of the past. We didn't really know very much about any foreign wars apart from the too young for the Korean War, but the Vietnam War was the first inkling of the fact that wars were still going on. But we felt completely safe. There was a balance between Russia and America. I remember the precarious moment when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened when I was 11, and that was worrying. I mean, I really was I do remember being taught how to shelter from nuclear weapons under the desk at school, which was going to be very helpful.
Yeah, yeah. I remember also the school around that time, and with the President Kennedy. I remember as a kid watching the news and being worried because my dad was worried, and it's but you're right. I think there's the hope that came out of the Second World War and the generation, you and I both from that similar generation, that there was hope around the 70s as we became young men. Right, you graduated, left university. What was your first job?
My first job was at Price Waterhouse in London. I wanted to come to London for whatever reason, just wanted to come to London. And at the time, what you did was apply to all the then Big Eight accounting firms. It's now the Big Four, but Big Eight, basically they've all combined, as you know. And unless you were either really stupid or you thumped the interviewer, you always got offered a job by each of them, and the salary was exactly the same. But then there was a requirement to go to London for a second interview, which involved them sending you a check for the plane fare. So you put a few of them together and come down overnight on a student train and make enough for a summer holiday. And I chose Price Waterhouse out of the other, well, against the other seven, because the letter, I had them pinned on my wall, all the same, identical salary, £1,350 a year. It slightly went up and down depending on what sort of degree you got. But the letter came from the staff partner who was called Howard Hughes. And most people in this call won't remember who the real Howard Hughes was, but he was a great American entrepreneur, aviator, womanizer, flyer, and so on. So I thought, if you're offered a job by Howard Hughes, then go for it. And I joined Price Waterhouse, which is a lovely, lovely firm.
Well, that's a good reason. I think if I saw a letter from Howard Hughes, I think I'd fall off the chair. So you did well to take the job. And how long were you at PwC?
Well, after 18 months, I was doing auditing, which is not the most exciting thing in the world. And after 18 months, I found myself one day in a loo in Basingstoke. We were auditing a factory there, which was a subsidiary of an American firm, and they were about to appoint receivers. So we got a call in the morning telling us to hide. And it was a rainy industrial estate way outside Basingstoke. So we hid, me and by that time, a staff member working for me 18 months in, and he and I hid in the loo playing chess under the thing all morning. And I just thought, this is no way to live. So I got to see my boss the next morning in London and resigned. And he then stopped me and gave me a job which was really hard work, long hours, some of it really boring but fascinating. It was in the wake of the secondary banking crisis in 1974. And my job was most of the time was to act as his bag carrier. And it was literally carrying bags full of papers and a big calculator and checking numbers and so on, but sitting in on meetings, listening to people either saving or not saving banks. And it was completely riveting. I learned so much.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny in the when you're in this industry as long as we've been in it, how many times you see a banking crisis. It's they seem to come along very frequently.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Right. So you resigned from PwC, and where was it from there?
Well, I left. I resigned the day I qualified. Well, not actually, it was before I qualified. I did qualify, but I didn't know whether I'd qualified. But I decided that if I hadn't passed my final exams, I'd never sit an exam again. I just couldn't. I'd been sitting exams every year for the thick end of 20 years, and I thought that's enough. And I haven't sat an exam since then, including, I will confess, CISI exams. I got to be grandfathered in through the good works of an old friend of ours, Jim Rowley. But anyway, I resigned and made an appointment to see my boss, the man who'd been very kind to me and giving me this fascinating job, to tell him one Friday morning that I was leaving, and that I was going to join a magazine called Accountancy Age, which was then edited by Anthony Hilton, who many seeing this will know, who remains a close buddy. And as I was walking along to see my boss, somebody stuck his head out of his office and said, "Have you seen Accountancy Age this morning?" And I thought, oh dear, or words to that effect. And it was nothing to do with me, although it took them a long time to believe that. George, my boss, believed me, but essentially there was a story on the front page saying that PW people had been told that if they knew anyone who worked in a company that was what they called 100 uncommitted audits, so big companies that might be stolen as clients from other firms, they should take them out to dinner, lunch, etc. And that was strictly professionally not allowed at the time. Marketing wasn't allowed, and that wasn't. But everyone assumed that I'd done it. And for years afterwards, my picture was in reception areas in Pricewaterhouse saying, "Don't let him in." Finally, the man who'd done it fessed up. So I became a journalist on this magazine, which was great fun, hard work, hard play. And after about 18 months, Tony was offered the job of business editor of the Times and Sunday Times in New York. And in the way of the Times, not quite gave me his job, but there wasn't a very formal interview process. Actually, the first question the managing director who interviewed me asked me was, "Okay, car, let's get the car argument over with right away." This was in the days of company cars. So then I did that for a couple of years. And then I got a call one day from somebody on press day claiming to be the editor of The Economist. And I told the secretary to tell whoever it was to go away because I was busy. And she said, "I think it is actually." So it was. And a man called John Plender, who is a great hero of mine, brilliant, truly brilliant financial journalist, and like me, an accountant, he had left and had very kindly suggested me as a potential replacement. So I went there for some years, and I still do the odd bit there. And that was fascinating. And it just sort of opened my eyes to the potential for sort of higher level journalism. I mean, I think in my second week, two things happened. One, there was a budget, and I was asked to ring up the Chancellor to ask a question about it. And I said, "He's not going to speak to me." And he did. I mean, he rang back, but that was just unknown working for a trade magazine. But then somebody walked into the office that same week with some documentation which suggested that when the Dunlop-Pirelli merger happened, now most people on this call won't know what happened here, but it was two tire companies merged. And what he said was the two boards knew there was a problem, that the merger just wouldn't work, but it was just done to protect their backsides. But the problem was that the two directors who were directly involved in this were at the time two of the four trustees of The Economist. So I was essentially accusing them of lying to their shareholders some years ago. And I thought, oh, but this could be a short career. But the editor backed me up, and we ran the story very carefully vetted. And, it was a good example of this sort of pretty poor, very poor corporate governance, which ruled a long time ago. And it's perfect, but it's getting better.
Yeah. It's interesting because your career is almost mirrored the way the city has gone. So you've been involved with the city as long as it's evolved into what it is today, and also with journalism as well, because um, I think what you're describing, especially with Anthony Hilton, is traditional forms of journalism, which we don't necessarily see a lot of that today. It tends to be more commentary rather than the journalists that were of yesteryear.
And the spend, I think part of the problem is that the resourcing has gone down really dramatically. So, for
Mm,
instance, looking at the Evening Standard, where Tony was city editor for donkey's years, he had a staff of probably sort of typically 18 to 20 people, all hardworking, good people, and so on. Now, the city editor of the Standard is one man, as it happens, the son of a friend, and he
mm,
does a great job. But
mm.
it's one person doing a job that 20 used to do.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that in journalistic form, do you think the world is better, but as the way that we use social media and the sort of the light, you can hardly call it journalism, the sort of commentary, opinion-based pieces, or do you think we were better served when we had more expert journalism, traditional journalists that would fact check before they publish?
It sounds a bit old, but yeah, that fact checking very important, and also the experience to know when something might be wrong with what someone was saying. I mean, these days an awful lot of it is slightly rehashed press releases because journalists simply don't have the time to do proper work on it, and the fact checking is much less than it used to be. You know, the best fact checker I know in journalism these days is the editor of the CISI's magazine, Jane Pladen. Specific name check for Jane, who's very
Mm,
modest about this, but Jane is forever, if I write things, forever asks me about facts and queries them,
mm,
which is terrific. I should add in the credits Paul Mukherjee, who's one of the editors working on a great professional refresher series, and Paul is
mm.
good at questioning things, and it's wonderful to have something queried. It's usual. I mean, quite often when they question something I've written, I've got the facts wrong, I've got it slightly wrong, and so on, which is great,
Mm,
very helpful.
mm. Because we're also talking about trust, aren't we? Because fact checking builds trust as well. And I guess like me, you read a lot on it every day, and mainly off of social media, what you see on the screen. And I just wonder how much is real and how much is just fluff that people are just putting up there to fill a screen.
Well, certainly there's a real flight, certainly in my head, there's a sort of flight to quality that I trust what I see in the BBC, I trust what I see in the Financial Times. Some other papers I just don't trust so much. I don't mind bias, that's okay. So in our house, we get, and I'm not defining who does what, but one of us gets the Guardian, one of us gets the Telegraph, and it's not about political stuff. But although one is left leaning, one is right leaning, the facts are, I believe, right. It's just they take a different view of them.
Yeah, yeah. What about Big Bang, George? Deregulation in 1986. Did this have an impact on your career at all?
It didn't really have a direct impact, but it meant that there were so many other things to write about. I mean, when the Americans came, at the time I was running some magazines, and it meant there was always something new to write about. There was always something exciting going on in the world, people being bought, sold, etc., etc. And again, it seemed like rosy sunshine in the future, partly driven by the fact that a lot of sort of at the time all the people that I knew were walking off with huge wadges of cash in their back pockets to retire to the country,
Yes.
having sold their firms to big Americans.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can certainly attest to that. It seemed to be people leaving the city in droves with fat balances following them. Right. Well, we're going to take a break at on the first part of getting to know George. And we'll be back with the second part, which will bring us up to date in just a few minutes. So thanks, George. Stay online, and we'll start again in just a minute.